Hey everybody, I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you about something that I always like to tell my PR classes about. On the screen, you will see what I typically refer to as the big board. The big board is something I used to carry into all my in person classes. I stopped doing it because, as you can probably tell by looking at it, it's gotten kind of beat up over the years, so I decided to digitize it. Long story short, the big board touches on two things that are critically important for any communicator, whether they're doing public relations, advertising, social media, whatever. There are two questions that any good communicator always asks themselves before and during any communications effort. And those two things, as you can see right here, what is my purpose? In other words, what is the big overarching goal of what I'm trying to accomplish here? And that can be, and by the way, that's a question you need to ask whether you're putting together a full-blown, communications marketing campaign, or even if you're just doing something small and fairly tactical, like writing a press release. By the way, purpose, you will sometimes, if you can see here, it says AKA scope. Scope is another word that's often used in place of purpose. In other words, what's the big picture thing here that we're trying to get done? Okay, and then who's your audience? You always have to keep your audience in mind. If you don't know who your audience is, how are you going to know how to communicate with them? How are you going to know where you need to communicate with them? I mean, think about it. If you wanted to communicate, say you were putting out a product targeting senior citizens, TikTok would probably be a pretty lousy place for you to be communicating because there aren't a lot of senior citizens on TikTok. Okay, if you were, let's see, if you were trying to reach, let's say, people who are high school graduates, you would probably not want to focus heavily on college media simply because those folks aren't in college. Okay, so who's the audience? Where can you reach them? How can you reach them? What type of messages are likely to resonate with them? So those are two questions you always want to keep in mind when you're communicating: purpose and audience. The second part of the big board is what I call the 6 levels to any communications effort. Um, this is something, there are similar things to this that you will see in some textbooks and in some other disciplines. For example, if you've ever taken an intro to marketing course, there's something known as the consumer adoption process, which is pretty similar to this, but not quite the same. So here's what I mean when I say there are 6 levels to any communications effort. Every single communications effort is always about behavior. You are always ultimately trying to get people to modify their behavior in some way. You want them to do something, buy a product, donate to a cause, vote for someone. You always want to modify their behavior and get them to either do something or maybe stop doing something or maybe do more of something. So all communication efforts are ultimately about modifying behavior, okay? That said, you can't get to this point where you modify people's behavior unless your audience has gone through these first 5 levels first. And I break these down into these 5 levels into 2 broad categories. First 3 steps are what I call the logic or the rationality steps. These are the parts where you have to get through to people's, as I call it, the thinking part of their brain. So you got to make them aware of it. They have to hear about your message, right? And then once they hear about your message, you have to make sure they understand it, that they comprehend your message, okay? By the way, that goes back to another reason why knowing your audience is really important, because you need to know that you're talking to that audience in a way they can understand, okay? If you were trying to talk to, let's say you had a product for senior citizens that would just, that was a tech product, okay? You would need to make sure you put it in real clear layman's terms so they can understand it. Because old people, and I can say this because I'm pretty much getting to be an old person, aren't always so savvy with technology, okay? Then you need to be hitting them with that message often enough and in a way that's compelling enough so that they remember the message, they recall it, okay? So these are the thinking parts, the logical parts of the brain. You have to make them aware, you have to make them comprehend, and then you have to make sure they can recall your message. Once you get through that, then you get to the emotional levels, okay? This is where you're going to activate the feeling parts of the brain. And the first part of that is attitude, okay? This level, in other people's a description of this process, it goes by a lot of names: opinion, belief, attitude, etc. This is where you get people to believe what you're saying, to get them to believe your message. And then you got to motivate them to care about that message enough to do what you ultimately want them to do. Okay? And here's the thing. I'll give you a real quick example to show you how a lot of communication efforts can break down in between attitude and motivation. And the example I always use is smoking. When I was much younger, I smoked. Okay? Well, I was aware that smoking was bad for me. I understood why. I understood all the health risks. I certainly had no trouble remembering that. I had a reminder every time I pulled out a pack of cigarettes. There was the Surgeon General's warning right on it. And I believed it. I mean, it wasn't that I heard those things and I thought, that's silly. Smoking doesn't hurt you. The problem and why I didn't quit for a long time is motivation. I didn't care enough. I was young. I didn't really worry about my health back then, ever. So I wasn't motivated. It wasn't until I got into my early 30s that some things in my life changed, and then I got motivated to where, yes, I cared enough to quit smoking, and then I finally did the behavior that anti-smoking groups wanted me to do, okay? So again, keep these things in mind whenever you're dealing with a communications effort. What is your purpose, who's your audience, and then as you're trying to build a communications effort, and as you're trying to write messages for it, and you're writing tactics that you'll use to deliver those messages, ask yourself, where is your audience right now on these 6 levels, okay? Do you need to raise awareness first, or do they already know about you and understand you, okay? For example, if you were selling, Coca-Cola products like Diet Coke and Sprite, most people are pretty well aware of those products and understand what they are. And there's enough advertising, they probably, if you mention the brand name, they would remember it pretty easily. So with those folks, you might want to focus on the emotional levels, okay? If you're pitching or if you're promoting or communicating about a brand new product, well, then you're going to probably have to start at awareness, okay? So anyway, like I say, keep these things in mind as you are moving through this course and as you are working, and then as you start moving into other courses, if you're a PR major or minor, because remembering these 2 questions and these 6 levels will come in handy.